the story of America's first postal system does not begin with envelopes, stamps, or the orderly mailboxes we recognize today. Rather, it begins with fear, uncertainty, and the simple human need to communicate across long, dangerous distances. In the early 1600s, when the first English colonies struggled to survive along the Atlantic coast, communication with the outside world was painfully slow, often relying on chance, ships arriving from England, travelers passing by, or handwritten messages entrusted to strangers with no guarantee they would reach their destination. There was no official network, no organized routes, and certainly no system meant for the common colonist. Yet, even in these fragile early settlements, a belief was forming: information was power, and the ability to send it safely would shape the future of a nation. For the colonists, communication wasn't just about staying in touch with family. It was about survival. Orders from England took months to reach the colonies. Laws, trade agreements, land disputes, military warnings, and religious decrees all depended on timely correspondence. But with no infrastructure, messages moved slowly, delayed by harsh weather, pirate threats, and hostile territory. Merchants complained that business stalled for lack of information. Governors wrote letters that never arrived. Religious leaders struggled to maintain unity between congregations separated by miles of wilderness. It became painfully clear that the colonies needed more than scattered messengers. They needed a system, organized, protected, and regulated. America's earliest postal milestone came in 1639 when the Massachusetts General Court designated a single building, Richard Fairbanks Tavern, as the official mail drop for overseas communication. This makeshift postal hub was simple. Letters arriving from England were left at the tavern, and colonists could come to retrieve them. Outgoing mail was collected, sealed, and placed onto ships departing for Europe. Nothing about this resembled a modern postal system, but it marked a significant shift. Communication was no longer left to chance. It was beginning to be centralized, overseen, and supervised. Fairbanks Tavern became the seed from which the American postal tradition would grow. By the late 1600s, England recognized that the colonies needed a formal system, and that control and communication would benefit the crown. In 1692, King William III granted Thomas Neal a 21-year patent giving him authority to establish and maintain a postal service in the American colonies. Neal appointed a deputy, Andrew Hamilton, who began creating structured routes between major cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. These were the first organized intercolonial mail routes on American soil. Hamilton introduced fixed delivery times, standardized rates, and official riders. Though still rudimentary, this system connected the colonies in a way they had never experienced before. Early postal riders faced some of the most perilous journeys in colonial America. Their routes took them through thick forests, across rivers without bridges, and along poorly marked trails where one wrong turn could lead to days of wandering. Threats, both human and natural, were everywhere. Native groups resisting colonial expansion, wild animals, storms, and hostile terrain forced riders to develop resilience and speed. Still, these riders became the lifeline of the colonies, carrying news that shaped political debates, warned of conflict, and sustained fragile relationships between distant settlements. One of the turning points in postal history came in 1737 when a young and ambitious Benjamin Franklin was appointed postmaster of Philadelphia. Franklin's natural efficiency, combined with his curiosity about communication, transformed the chaotic system into something faster and more reliable. He eliminated unnecessary delays, punished postal workers who failed to deliver mail on time, and introduced innovations such as measured distances and record keeping. He even personally inspected routes, riding long stretches himself to identify shortcuts. It was Franklin who first imagined the postal service as a unifying force rather than a mere administrative tool. Despite his success, Franklin was eventually dismissed by the British Crown in 1774, accused of encouraging colonial rebellion. Ironically, his removal only strengthened his determination. By this time, the colonies were pushing toward independence, and the need for secure, revolutionary-controlled communication became urgent. British censorship, intercepted letters, and political tensions turned mail into a weapon. Colonists needed to ensure their messages were protected from royal surveillance, and that information supporting the revolution could flow freely between leaders. The moment the British removed Franklin, the Continental Congress responded by forming an American-controlled postal system. In July 1775, 1 year before the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin was appointed the very first Postmaster General of the United States. Under his leadership, a network of reliable routes was established almost overnight, connecting all 13 colonies. Riders loyal to the Revolution were appointed. Confidential messages could be exchanged without fear of interception. This system became the communication backbone of the Revolution, enabling coordination of battles, political strategy, and vital intelligence. It was, in many ways, America's first federal institution. After independence, the postal system did not simply continue, it expanded aggressively. New routes were carved across territories, and the government recognized that communication would be the glue holding the young nation together. The Postal Act of 1792 made sending newspapers cheaper, supporting national literacy and political awareness. Communities far from major cities began receiving regular mail. The postal system became not just a service, but a symbol of unity, a democratic lifeline that promised every citizen access to information. America's first postal system was born not from convenience but from necessity, shaped by hardship, ambition, and the relentless desire for connection. From a tavern in Massachusetts to Benjamin Franklin's revolutionary routes, the system evolved into something larger than communication. It became a cornerstone of nation-building. This was only the beginning. In the decades to come, the postal service would stretch across mountains, deserts, and frontiers, becoming the network that made a continent-sized nation feel connected. But to understand how it achieved this extraordinary transformation, we must continue deeper into its history. When the Revolutionary War ended, the United States found itself standing on uncertain ground. The ink was still fresh on the Treaty of Paris, government institutions were fragile, and the young nation stretched across a patchwork of newly defined territories. Yet one thing was immediately clear: if this new republic hoped to survive, it needed a dependable network of communication across its expanding borders. The postal system, once a tool of resistance, was now expected to become a unifying force, one that would bind farmers, merchants, politicians, and frontiersmen into a single national identity. The stakes were high, and the responsibility placed on the postal service was enormous. When the Revolutionary War ended, the United States found itself standing on uncertain ground. The ink was still fresh on the Treaty of Paris, government institutions were fragile, and the young nation stretched across a patchwork of newly defined territories. Yet one thing was immediately clear: if this new republic hoped to survive, it needed a dependable network of communication across its expanding borders. The postal system, once a tool of resistance, was now expected to become a unifying force, one that would bind farmers, merchants, politicians, and frontiersmen into a single national identity. The stakes were high, and the responsibility placed on the postal service was enormous. Benjamin Franklin, though no longer Postmaster General after independence, left behind a blueprint for what a successful American postal system could be. His innovations, standardized routes, regular schedules, efficient delivery, became the foundation of the nation's communication network. But now, the challenge was not innovation, it was scale. The United States was growing, stretching westward from the Atlantic coast toward uncharted territories. New towns appeared almost overnight. Roads were unreliable, maps were incomplete, and travel remained dangerous. Yet the government understood that without a postal presence in these regions, settlers would feel isolated and disconnected from the new nation they were supposed to belong to. In 1789, the newly formed U.S. Congress began shaping the postal system into a true federal institution. The post office was placed under government authority, making it one of the very first public services created by the United States. This was no accident. Leaders like George Washington knew that communication was the backbone of democracy. To give citizens access to reliable information was to give them power, political power, economic power, and intellectual power. The very act of sending a letter became a symbol of participation in the nation's future. If there was one law that transformed the American postal system forever, it was the Postal Act of 1792. This legislation did much more than regulate mail. It shaped the future of American society. It guaranteed privacy by making it illegal for postal officials to open letters without authorization. It established thousands of miles of post roads, ensuring that even isolated regions would remain connected. Most importantly, it offered extremely cheap rates for newspapers, promoting literacy and public knowledge. The founders believed that an informed citizenry was essential to democracy, and the postal system became the engine of that belief. The impact of the Postal Act was immediate. Newspapers that once circulated only among the wealthy elite spread across small towns and rural communities. Ideas, debates, political arguments, and international news reached Americans of all backgrounds. For the first time, a farmer in the countryside had access to the same information as a merchant in the city. The Postal Service became not just a communication system, but a cultural equalizer, bridging social divides and giving ordinary citizens the tools to participate in national discussions. As settlers began pushing westward, the postal system followed closely behind. Post riders traveled across rough terrain, mountains, forests, rivers, and frontier wilderness, to deliver mail to remote homesteads and newly formed settlements. Each new post office became a sign that civilization had arrived. Communities celebrated the opening of these buildings as if they were marking their official connection to the rest of the country. More than schools, churches, or government halls, the post office became the most important structure in a frontier town. It meant people could stay informed, stay connected, and stay hopeful. But expanding the postal network was no simple task. Many areas lacked proper roads, forcing riders to rely on narrow trails carved by animals or indigenous groups. Rain turned paths into mud pits. Winter froze rivers that served as makeshift routes. Entire regions remained inaccessible for weeks at a time. Mailbags were often soaked, crushed, or lost. Riders risked injury, starvation, and attacks from both wildlife and hostile forces. Yet they pressed forward, knowing that the messages they carried, news of births, deaths, land titles, business deals, political debates, held immeasurable value for the people waiting on the other end. By the early 1800s, America began to invest in better transportation infrastructure. The introduction of stagecoaches revolutionized delivery by offering faster, safer, and more dependable routes than horseback riders alone. Stagecoach lines transported large quantities of mail across hundreds of miles, stopping at designated stations for fresh horses and supplies. Meanwhile, states constructed major roads, turnpikes, bridges, and plank routes that improved travel speed and made communication more predictable. The postal system became the chief motivator for better infrastructure, with government funding often focused on improving mail routes before anything else. As the 19th century approached, the Postal Service became one of the most respected institutions in the country. Its reliability gave citizens confidence in their government. Its reach connected states that otherwise felt worlds apart. Its presence in every region gave the illusion of a unified nation, even when political disagreements threatened to fracture the young republic. To many Americans, the arrival of mail, whether by rider or stagecoach, symbolized the steady heartbeat of the country. No matter the weather, the distance, or the danger, the mail came, and the nation remained connected. By the early 1800s, the American postal system had come a long way from a colonial tavern serving as a pickup point. It had become a national institution with thousands of miles of routes, hundreds of post offices, and a reputation for reaching even the most distant corners of the country. But this success only set the stage for an even greater challenge. As America expanded further west and population grew, the demand for faster, more reliable long-distance communication intensified. The next chapter in postal history would introduce daring riders, high-risk routes, and innovations that pushed human endurance to the limit. By the early 1800s, the United States was no longer a cluster of coastal colonies. It was a nation stretching toward the Mississippi River, hungry for land, opportunity, and expansion. The Louisiana Purchase had nearly doubled the country's size. Settlers, adventurers, merchants, miners, and fortune seekers began pushing into territories that the founding fathers had only imagined on maps. Yet as the population surged westward, the postal system faced a new and daunting question: how do you deliver mail across thousands of miles of wilderness, mountains, deserts, and uncharted frontier? Communication wasn't merely a convenience anymore, it was the lifeline tying distant families, governments, and economies to the heart of the nation. The farther Americans traveled from the established cities of the East, the more critical the need for fast, reliable long-distance communication became. Letters between Missouri and California took weeks, sometimes months, relying on slow ships that sailed around South America or on hazardous overland wagons crawling through treacherous trails. News from Washington arrived long after it mattered. Business contracts expired before signatures returned, and personal letters, meant to comfort loved ones, often arrived after the writer had already moved, married, or passed away. The nation needed a bold solution, one that would shrink the distance between its people. Before the creation of the Pony Express, several attempts were made to accelerate communication across the expanding West. Mail caravans were introduced, but they were slow and vulnerable to attack. Some groups experimented with lightweight riders who traveled in teams, but the lack of organized stations made their routes unpredictable. Even the military tried to carry mail through outposts, but their focus was defense, not communication. As the stakes grew higher, the government realized that the West required a postal system engineered with unprecedented speed, precision, and courage. In 1860, the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company introduced a revolutionary idea, a relay system of expert riders who would carry mail on horseback from Missouri to California in record time. The distance, more than 1,900 miles, was nothing short of brutal. Riders would race between stations spaced roughly 10 to 15 miles apart, switching to a fresh horse at each stop. Every 75 to 100 miles, a completely new rider took over. This system was relentless, efficient, and breathtakingly fast. The Pony Express promised something America had never seen before: mail delivered in just 10 days. The Pony Express riders were not ordinary men, they were young, fearless, and shockingly lightweight. Most were teenagers, chosen for their speed and stamina rather than age or experience. Before joining, every rider took an oath swearing not to swear, drink, or mistreat the mail. Their job was dangerous beyond imagination. They rode through raging rivers, scorching deserts, snow-covered mountains, and regions marked by intense conflict. Many carried weapons, but their true protection was speed. The faster they moved, the safer they were. The image of a lone rider racing across the plains became a symbol of bravery woven into American folklore. Behind every heroic rider stood a network of roughly 190 relay stations scattered across the wilderness. These stations, some nothing more than rough cabins, were operated by station keepers who lived in isolation, surrounded by wildlife, storms, and the constant threat of attack. Their routine was harsh but essential. They fed riders, cared for horses, repaired saddles, and guarded incoming mail with their lives. Without these rugged and often forgotten individuals, the speed of the Pony Express would have been impossible. The relay stations became the heartbeat of the system, remote islands of civilization in a sea of untamed land. One of the most brilliant innovations of the Pony Express wasn't the horse or the rider, but the saddle cover known as the mochila. Designed with 4 locked pockets for letters, the mochila could be lifted off one horse and draped over another in seconds. This eliminated the need to unload mailbags or reorganize letters during each switch. With a single movement, the entire load of mail transferred from one horse to the next. This simple but ingenious invention compressed precious minutes into seconds, and those seconds allowed riders to achieve the impossible. While the Pony Express is remembered as a legendary adventure, its reality was far from romantic. Riders faced starvation, frostbite, dehydration, and exhaustion. Many died from falls, storms, or ambush. Horses collapsed from burnout. Relay stations were attacked or destroyed. Mailbags were sometimes lost in floods, fires, or blizzards. Yet, despite these hardships, the system worked with astonishing reliability. Letters raced across the continent so quickly that Americans on both coasts felt, for the first time, truly connected. For many, the Pony Express represented the nation's determination to conquer distance through sheer will. Perhaps the most surprising part of Pony Express history is how short-lived it was. Despite its fame, the system operated for only 18 months. By 1861, technology rendered it obsolete. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph connected the East and West with instant communication. Once telegraph lines stretched across the continent, there was no longer a need for the world's fastest horseback riders. The Pony Express quietly ended, its last ride completed with little fanfare. Yet its legacy endured. It proved that rapid communication across the continent was possible and necessary. Though the Pony Express was short-lived, its impact on the postal system was profound. It changed America's mindset about communication, speed, and national unity. It demonstrated that the government and private companies could collaborate to achieve extraordinary feats. And it inspired generations with stories of courage, endurance, and frontier spirit. The Pony Express lives on today as an icon, etched into museums, stamps, films, and collective memory. More importantly, it prepared America for the next great transformation that would permanently redefine communication: the rise of railroads. By the early to mid-1800s, America had entered an age of invention that would redefine the way people lived, traveled, and communicated. Steam power surged through rivers and railroads, turning what once took weeks into journeys of days. To the Postal Service, this was not simply technological progress, it was a revolution. The limitations of horseback riders and stagecoaches were becoming painfully obvious in a rapidly expanding nation. Railroads offered a solution that the postal system had dreamed of for decades: speed, reliability, and the ability to carry massive loads of mail across hundreds of miles without fatigue. The stagecoach era had been heroic, but the era of steel would become unstoppable. The moment the first locomotives connected major American cities, postal officials wasted no time. By the 1830s, trains were transporting mail faster than any method previously imagined. Suddenly, letters that once took days to move between towns now arrived within hours. Railroads created a new rhythm for communication, allowing newspapers to spread across states almost as quickly as news broke. For merchants, politicians, and families scattered across the country, this was transformative. Information became more immediate, businesses more efficient, and public awareness more unified. America was no longer a country waiting on mail, it was a country moving with it. One breakthrough remained: sorting mail while traveling. In the early 1860s, the Railway Post Office, RPO, was born. Instead of waiting to sort mail in stationary buildings, postal clerks worked inside specially designed train cars. These moving post offices allowed workers to process letters on the go, cutting hours, and sometimes days, off delivery times. The RPO clerks became some of the most skilled postal employees in history, standing and swaying train cars, organizing thousands of letters as the locomotive thundered across the countryside. They were fast, precise, and fearless. With rifles mounted for protection and lanterns swinging overhead, they were the unseen backbone of America's communication infrastructure. As railroads expanded westward, they carried the postal service with them across plains, mountains, deserts, and river valleys. By 1869, the completion of the first transcontinental railroad changed everything. Overnight, America fused into a single, interconnected nation. What once took weeks to deliver via wagon or the Pony Express now arrived in just a few days. The postal system became a source of national pride, proof that the United States was capable not only of conquering its vast geography, but also of stitching its people together from coast to coast. The railroad had achieved what no government decree alone could: it made the nation feel smaller, more intimate, and more unified. With the speed and reach of railroad-based mail, something extraordinary happened. Businesses began selling directly through the postal system. Mail-order catalogs, most famously Sears, Roebuck and Company, allowed Americans in remote areas to buy tools, clothing, furniture, seeds, medicine, and even houses. A farmer in Wyoming could order supplies as easily as a shopkeeper in Boston. The postal system became an engine of commerce, lifting rural communities into economic participation. For many Americans, the mail was no longer just letters, it was opportunity, independence, and advancement. Despite these advancements, millions of rural Americans still had to travel miles to retrieve their mail. Some made the journey by wagon, others by foot, and many waited weeks between visits. As the nation grew more democratic, pressure mounted for rural free delivery, mail delivered directly to every home, not just to those in towns. After years of political debate, rural free delivery, RFD, launched in the 1890s. The first test routes were so successful that RFD spread rapidly. For the first time in American history, every household, rich or poor, urban or rural, received mail to their doorstep. It was a triumph of equality and accessibility, reshaping daily life for millions. With rural delivery established, Americans wanted more than letters, they wanted packages. In 1913, the Postal Service introduced parcel post, allowing everyday citizens to send and receive large goods affordably. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Farmers could ship produce directly to customers. Families could send clothing, tools, instruments, and household goods across states. Children received birthday gifts from distant relatives. Small businesses flourished. The nation was becoming accustomed to the idea that anything could arrive by mail, and that concept laid the foundation for the modern shipping industry. By the early 20th century, the next frontier of communication took to the skies. In 1918, the United States launched the world's first regularly scheduled airmail service. Early pilots flew open cockpit planes through storms, fog, and darkness with little more than a compass and courage to guide them. Crashes were common, danger was constant, and yet these aviators cut delivery times dramatically. What trains accomplished for the 19th century, airplanes achieved for the 20th. Airmail became a symbol of innovation, proof that the Postal Service was always willing to push the limits of human ability to bring people closer together. As the decades passed, the postal system adapted again and again, through wars, economic crises, industrialization, technological revolutions, and population booms. Mail trucks replaced horses. Sorting machines replaced manual labor. Zip codes organized the nation into an efficient grid. Express services sped up delivery. And in the digital age, the postal system evolved from a simple carrier of letters into a critical logistics network delivering medicine, ballots, packages, books, documents, and essential goods. Even in an era of instant electronic communication, the physical mail remained irreplaceable, a tangible, trusted thread connecting millions of lives. The story of America's first postal system is more than a history of letters and routes, it is the story of a nation learning to communicate with itself. From colonial taverns to steam engines, from horseback riders to aircraft, from handwritten letters to billion-dollar logistics systems, the evolution of the Postal Service mirrors the evolution of the United States itself. It has survived wars, disasters, and technological upheaval. It has carried news that shaped elections, delivered paychecks that fed families, and transported messages that changed history. The American postal system did not merely support the nation, it helped create it. In its journey from scattered colonies to a unified country, America found its voice through the mail. And even today, that voice continues to echo across cities, across states, across time.